Thousands of retired cabooses sit rusting in rail yards, fields, and scrap yards across the country. So grabbing one for your backyard should be easy. It isn't. To understand why these heavy rolling structures are so difficult to acquire today, it helps to look at what they actually did when they were active. For over a century, the caboose was not a decorative novelty or a cozy backyard retreat. It was a rugged, highly functional workplace, the rolling command center at the very end of a freight train. A freight train in the 20th century was a massive mechanical force, often stretching over a mile in length and carrying thousands of tons of cargo. Up in the locomotive, the engineer and fireman focused on the track ahead, completely cut off from the rear of their consist. They could not see a shifted cargo load, a broken coupler, or a sticking brake shoe 5,000 feet back. The safety of the entire train depended on the crew riding in the final car. This rear crew, typically the conductor and one or two brakemen, used the caboose as their mobile office. Inside, the space was highly utilitarian, crammed with a writing desk, a coal-burning stove for heat and cooking, a small sink, and basic berths for long journeys. But its primary purpose was safety and observation. The physical design of the caboose was dictated entirely by this need for constant, active visibility. The cupola, that small cabin-like structure protruding from the roof, allowed a crewman to sit elevated above the train line, scanning the long roofline of cars ahead. On other models, bay windows projected from the sides, giving the crew a clear view down the flanks of the train. From these vantage points, the crew kept a constant watch for danger. They looked for the telltale signs of mechanical failure, a sudden plume of dust indicating a derailed wheel, a shifted load of timber leaning dangerously off a flat car, or the white smoke and toxic smell of a hot box. A hot box occurred when the friction bearings on a wheel axle ran dry of lubrication, generating enough heat to ignite the oil-soaked packing. If left undetected, a hot box would melt the axle, causing a catastrophic derailment. The crew in the caboose were the final line of defense. If they spotted smoke or noticed a dangerous drop in air brake pressure on their cabin gauges, they could pull the emergency valve, immediately stopping the train from the rear. This was demanding, often dangerous labor. The ride at the end of a long train was violently turbulent as the heavy cars bunched together and stretched out, tossing men across the cabin. To the workers who lived and worked within them, these 30-ton steel and wooden hulls were essential tools of survival on the rails, serving as the physical eyes and ears of the railroad system. The physical presence of the rear crew began to yield to a small, battery-powered box clamped directly to the trailing coupler of the last freight car. This technology originated in 1969 in New Smyrna Beach, Florida. Two innovators on the Florida East Coast Railway, Dale Cornett and Bob Douglas, designed a 75-pound device equipped with a flashing red light. This early prototype, nicknamed the Shin Splitter, provided a basic visual warning to trailing trains, but it quickly evolved into a sophisticated electronic sentinel that altered the mechanics of train operations. The breakthrough was the automation of safety monitoring. Previously, a conductor in the cupola watched the air pressure gauges and scanned the train line for mechanical failures. The electronic system, which eventually became known as the end-of-train device, or FRED, replaced human eyes with sensors and radio telemetry. A pressure transducer attached directly to the rear brake pipe measured the air pressure continuously. Instead of a crewman reading a physical dial in a moving cabin, the device transmitted this vital data via radio signals directly to a receiver inside the locomotive cab, keeping the engineer informed of brake line integrity in real time. Beyond monitoring pressure, the unit acted as an active safety system. Internal motion sensors detected if the train broke apart. If an accidental separation occurred, the device communicated with the front cab. allowing the engineer to initiate an emergency brake application from both ends of the train simultaneously. Meanwhile, the critical task of spotting overheated wheel bearings, once a major focus of the Caboose watch, shifted to automated wayside hotbox detectors installed along the tracks. These ground-based infrared scanners checked axle temperatures as trains passed, rendering visual smoke detection obsolete. By transforming manual observation into automated data streams, this compact hardware box proved that a 30-ton crude car was no longer necessary to protect the rear of a train. On October 14, 1980, President Jimmy Carter signed the Staggers Rail Act, deregulating freight rates and granting railroads unprecedented operational freedom. This legislative shift set off a rapid chain reaction that systematically dismantled a century of railroad tradition. For decades, labor unions had successfully protected the caboose through rigid crew-size contracts. Under the new regulatory environment, Class I railroads gained the leverage they needed to challenge these requirements, aiming to eliminate what they viewed as an expensive, redundant piece of rolling stock. The legal battle over the caboose's future came to a head in July 1982, when Presidential Emergency Board 195 recommended that railroads be allowed to phase out the cars on non-through freight assignments, provided safety was maintained. 3 months later, on October 15, 1982, the United Transportation Union signed a national agreement. Article 10, Section 3 of this agreement established the formal guidelines for removing cabooses from specific line runs. What followed was a series of intense arbitration disputes that broke the union's final resistance. When Burlington Northern attempted to implement the new rules, the conflict went before Arbitration Board 419. On December 19, 1983, the board ruled that carriers could eliminate cabooses on trains operated by unassigned crews, making the remaining train crew responsible for installing the new electronic rear-end devices without extra pay. When disputes persisted, a forced arbitrated award on February 8, 1985, stripped away the remaining protections, granting railroads the absolute right to eliminate cabooses in long-haul through freight service. The impact of these regulatory and labor shifts was swift and absolute. The last major American caboose manufacturer ceased production in 1981, knowing the market had permanently collapsed. Throughout the mid to late 1980s, the combined forces of technology and new crew contracts eliminated between 40,000 and 45,000 rear-end crew jobs. Standard freight crews shrank from 3 workers to 2. This massive displacement left tens of thousands of steel and wooden cabooses obsolete. Virtually overnight, railroads shunted these redundant cars onto remote sidings, packed them into salvage yards, or sold them for scrap, creating the sudden, deceptive appearance of a massive, cheap surplus ready for anyone to claim. This vast diaspora of rolling steel created an instant, striking market illusion. To the casual observer, a retired caboose sitting on a weed-choked siding looks exactly like a forgotten bargain. It is a piece of heavy equipment that has lost its operational purpose, stripped of its commercial utility, and left behind by modern technology. In almost any other corner of the economy, obsolete machinery depreciates toward zero, waiting for an enterprising buyer to cart it away for the price of raw materials. It is easy to envision these 30-ton metal cabins as the ultimate eccentric backyard project, a ready-made guest house, a rustic home office, or a novel retreat that should cost little more than a used pickup truck. The physical presence of thousands of these cars, scattered across remote rail lines and regional yards, suggests a buyer's market of unprecedented scale. If the railroads have absolutely no operational use for these retired cabins, then a private buyer with a patch of land should be able to acquire one with a simple transaction. From a distance, it looks like an easily accessible byproduct of industrial modernization, a heavy-duty steel shell waiting for a second life. But this visible abundance is a mirage. The liquidation of railroad infrastructure operates outside the logic of the typical second-hand market. These objects bypassed public clearance channels entirely, routing directly into a closed, highly regulated industrial disposal network. The expectation of a cheap, simple acquisition completely ignores the structural reality of how railroads retire their physical property. What begins as an appealing weekend purchase quickly transforms into a complex, multi-layered ownership puzzle where the rules of normal commerce no longer apply. Class 1 railroads operate as massive industrial corporations. They do not maintain retail sales departments. When a caboose reaches the end of its service life, the company formally classifies it as a retired rail asset. To the corporate accounting office, this 30-ton object is no longer a vehicle. It is a bulk package of industrial scrap. The decision to retire a caboose triggers an internal corporate calculation dominated by raw steel value and liability. Railroad risk management teams are notoriously protective. Selling heavy machinery directly to an individual retains a trail of legal liability. If that buyer is injured during transport, or if hazardous materials are discovered later, the railroad faces costly lawsuits. To eliminate this risk, corporate policy almost universally mandates that decommissioned rolling stock must be routed through certified salvage yards or destroyed. The scrapyard pays the railroad a guaranteed price per ton of steel, breaks the car down under controlled environmental conditions, and erases the liability footprint entirely. A private individual offering a few $1,000s simply cannot compete with the clean, risk-free transaction of a bulk scrap contract. This industrial disposal network leaves very few cars intact, and those that do survive often end up in the custody of railroad museums and preservation societies. To the hopeful buyer, these sightings look like potential acquisitions, but these organizations operate under strict structural and legal constraints. Once a caboose enters a museum's collection, it becomes subject to formal deaccession policies. Museum collection rules, bound by nonprofit bylaws and tax codes, establish that donated historic equipment cannot be sold to private individuals. Even if a museum has multiple identical cabooses rotting on a back siding, the administrative hurdles and ethical codes governing museum property prevent them from liquidating these assets to the public. This systemic blockage is where many ambitious acquisitions abruptly end. Consider the experience of an online collector who tracked down a 1955 cupola caboose that had spent decades on a regional line. After locating the private owner and negotiating what seemed like a final purchase, the buyer drafted a complete logistics plan. But before any money could change hands, the transaction collapsed. The seller's original acquisition deed contained a strict, hidden clause. The car could never be resold to a private individual. The transfer was legally blocked, rendering months of negotiation useless. This is the invisible wall of the caboose market. Long before a buyer can even worry about cranes, tracks, or permits, the machinery of corporate liability, nonprofit law, and ancient property deeds quietly ensures the deal is dead before it can ever begin. The survivors that actually make it to the open market exist in a fragmented, highly uneven pricing environment. On public surplus sites, retired cabooses are often sold under in need of repair listings. At auction, these heavily weathered units frequently close for winning bids between $3,000 and $9,000. But these low entry prices are a trap for the unprepared. Once a buyer stands on a remote siding to inspect their potential purchase, the fantasy of a cheap backyard cabin quickly collapses. Decades of abandonment leave these 30-ton hulls exposed to severe rust, dry rot, and vandalism. The heavy steel plating is often paper-thin from corrosion. The structural sills are warped, and key mechanical components are stripped away. Draft gears are frozen, coupler knuckles are broken, and the specialized brass fittings inside are long gone. Fixing these structural defects requires hiring specialized railcar mechanics. Frame reinforcement, roof patching, and custom metal fabrication can easily add $5,000 to $12,000 in repairs before any interior renovation can begin. To avoid these massive restoration costs, serious collectors look to specialized railcar brokers like Ozark Mountain Railcar, or Cabooses for sale. These brokers source cars directly from short line operators or private yards, but this curation commands a premium. A well-kept caboose with a solid frame and intact interior wood or steel lining typically commands between $15,000 and $45,000. At this price point, the buyer is paying for completeness. The car is structurally sealed, the wheels and handbrakes are intact, and the interior is free of major environmental hazards, saving the buyer months of difficult rehabilitation work. This premium, broker-mediated path represents the only consistent way to achieve a successful private acquisition, as seen in a documented case study of an individual buyer. The buyer bypassed risky surplus auctions and worked with a broker to locate a structurally sound steel caboose. They negotiated a final purchase price of $12,500. Because the car was dry and structurally intact, the buyer did not have to spend thousands on heavy metal fabrication. Instead, they allocated $7,500 directly to the interior build-out, installing modern insulation, wood paneling, and basic electrical wiring. This brought their direct acquisition and refurbishment cost to $20,000. The owner completed the setup by pouring a dedicated concrete pad to satisfy local building codes, which treat a D-wheeled railcar as a permanent accessory structure. While this $20,000 investment created a functional retreat, it only covered the car itself. It did not account for the extensive logistical, environmental, and physical hurdles of moving 30 tons of steel across state lines. A standard steel caboose weighs between 25 and 30+ tons. Once a car is separated from the active rail line, that dead weight transforms the purchase from an eccentric hobby into a highly complex heavy-haul logistics operation. The buyer no longer owns a nostalgic piece of history. They own a 60,000-pound block of steel that cannot move an inch without a coordinated fleet of industrial machinery. The physical move requires a precise sequence of heavy equipment and administrative clearance. First, two 50-ton hydraulic cranes must be positioned at the rail siding to lift the massive hull off its wheels. This lift requires specialized rigging to prevent the steel frame from buckling under its own concentrated mass. Once airborne, the car must be lowered onto a multi-axle lowboy trailer, a vehicle designed to distribute the weight to satisfy federal road safety rules, which flag any load over 80,000 pounds. Moving this load on public roads introduces a secondary layer of friction. A loaded lowboy trailer requires a turning radius of at least 55 feet, making tight suburban corners and narrow rural lanes impassable without custom route planning. The carrier must submit a route approval packet to the Department of Transportation in every state traversed. In states like Ohio, these permits are only valid for 5 days, costing up to $200 and requiring warning signs, flags, and flashing red lights. If the load exceeds standard highway heights, the route must bypass low bridges, utility lines, and overhead traffic signals. Most states also mandate the use of pilot cars. These escort vehicles must precede and follow the trailer, monitoring lane clearances and communicating with the driver via two-way radio. Because of these constraints, transport companies charge between $3 and $5 per mile, plus flat rates for crane rentals, permit processing, and pilot services. A typical move of under 200 miles easily costs between $9,000 and $12,000. If the car has to cross several state lines, shipping fees quickly climb past $15,000, often doubling or tripling the original purchase price before the caboose ever touches private soil. Once the transport trailer arrives at the destination, the challenge shifts to the physical ground beneath it. You cannot park a 30-ton steel car on a grassy lawn. Without proper preparation, the sheer weight of the caboose will cause it to sink into the soil, warping the frame and trapping moisture that accelerates rust. Before the cranes can lower the vehicle, the site must undergo intensive civil engineering. Workers must grade the area to create a uniform slope, routing rainwater away from the landing zone. Proper drainage is essential. Many owners install French drains or gravel catch basins to prevent water from pooling beneath the undercarriage. The landing zone itself requires either a dedicated concrete slab or a short section of functional railroad track. A concrete pad must be at least 6 to 8 inches thick, poured over a heavily compacted subgrade to support the highly concentrated weight. If the owner chooses a traditional track setup, they must lay standard gauge rails exactly 4 feet, 8.5 inches apart, secured to wooden ties spaced 19 inches on center, resting on a 12-inch bed of crushed stone ballast. But the physical terrain often defeats the project before excavation even begins. A delivery lowboy trailer measures 10 feet wide and requires a massive 55-foot turning radius to navigate. Narrow rural roads, low-hanging tree branches, and tight driveway bends eliminate many otherwise suitable properties. If a heavy-haul truck cannot physically reach the prepared pad, or if there is no flat, clear space adjacent to the track for the two 50-ton cranes to stabilize their outriggers, the delivery is impossible. The land itself dictates whether a caboose can exist on it. Municipal zoning codes treat a railroad caboose as a non-traditional accessory structure, which strips away any assumption that a private property owner can simply park a rail car in a backyard. Under local laws, a caboose does not qualify as a standard shed or outbuilding. Many jurisdictions, including Oklahoma City and various districts in Utah, enforce strict ordinances that prohibit the construction or placement of any detached accessory structure unless a primary, permanent residence is already standing on the lot. Even on land with an existing home, the physical dimensions of a 30-ton caboose trigger restrictive building limits. Most residential zones enforce strict height caps of 12 to 15 feet and require structures to be set back at least 10 feet from all property lines. A typical caboose frequently exceeds these parameters. In Commerce Township, Michigan, any accessory structure larger than 100 square feet requires a formal zoning permit review. Other communities, like Montgomery County, limit accessory footprints to 600 square feet, while cities like Nashville cap total accessory coverage at 700 square feet. Apart from size, local planning boards apply compatibility tests to determine if a structure is customarily associated with residential use. Because a freight car is industrial machinery, municipal officials have wide discretion to reject the placement outright. If a buyer seeks a variance, they face a public hearing process that can take months, costing hundreds of dollars with no guarantee of approval. Local fire departments also raise concerns regarding emergency egress and safety codes for structures of this scale. Because of these regulatory walls, many ambitious caboose projects do not fail during highway transport or restoration, but dissolve quietly inside a municipal filing cabinet. A retired caboose sitting on its final foundation is not a clean, empty canvas. It is a 30-ton industrial artifact carrying decades of environmental and chemical wear. Because almost all surviving cabooses were manufactured before 1978, they are bound to the hazardous material standards of their era. The vibrant red exterior paint and the institutional green interior walls were commonly applied using heavy, lead-based formulas, which flake, chalk, and turn to toxic dust over years of exposure. Beneath the steel skin, the walls and ceiling cavities were routinely packed with raw asbestos insulation to protect crews from the extreme heat of coal-burning stoves and winter cold. This hazardous mineral also lines the original floor tiles, pipe wrapping, and the ancient brake shoes clinging to the undercarriage. Before a buyer can safely swing a hammer or strip a single wall, The Environmental Protection Agency requires formal hazardous material testing. If these tests return positive results, the project shifts from a casual weekend renovation into a strictly regulated abatement zone. Professional lead paint mitigation generally runs between $2,000 and $5,000. Remediating the asbestos-filled interior panels and pipe insulation can quickly add another $3,000 to $7,000. In total, a buyer often faces $5,000 to $12,000 in specialized environmental cleanup before any cosmetic upgrades can begin. This is slow, physically demanding labor that requires protective respirators, heavy-duty air monitoring equipment, and certified disposal methods. The steel framing itself presents secondary structural challenges. Decades of rainwater trapped behind the outer steel sheeting rots the underlying wooden framing and eats away the structural sills. Correcting these severe physical compromises requires industrial-grade sandblasting, heavy metal fabrication, and custom structural welding rather than simple carpentry. The Caboose ceases to be a nostalgic novelty. It becomes an active, high-liability construction site. When we stack these individual expenses into a single project ledger, the real cost of owning an authentic Caboose becomes clear. An entry-level purchase price of $3,000 to $12,500 is merely the starting line. Transporting 30 tons of steel by crane and lowboy trailer adds $9,000 to $12,000. Preparing the site with a graded concrete pad or a ballasted track segment costs $2,000 to $10,000. Navigating state transport permits and local zoning variances requires another $500 to $3,000. Then comes the physical recovery, $5,000 to $12,000 for certified lead and asbestos abatement, followed by an average of $7,500 for basic interior framing and utilities. This brings the total capital layout to between $20,500 and $98,000. Even before accounting for structural repairs, custom welding, or unexpected delays, the budget can quickly approach the cost of a small permanent house. For most prospective buyers, this arithmetic forces a pivot toward more practical alternatives. Prefabricated Caboose cabins, built with pre-cut wood and steel frames, provide the iconic silhouette for $25,000 to $45,000. Bypassing heavy cranes and transport permits entirely. Trailer-mounted Caboose tiny homes offer fully road-legal mobility and modern amenities for $30,000 to $55,000, operating completely outside the restrictive rules of municipal accessory structure zoning. For others, the most sustainable path is a museum partnership, where a $5,000 sponsorship helps preserve an authentic car on active museum tracks, granting the donor private access without any of the personal liability. Finally, a custom-designed tiny house built on a standard chassis, using reclaimed industrial materials, can capture the character of a rolling command center, delivering the romantic spirit of the rails without the crushing weight of a 30-ton steel reality. Today, the surviving cabooses that escaped the scrapper's torch exist in suspended animation. They are no longer just rail cars, but heavy monuments to a bypassed era of American labor. Preserving one means fighting modern logistics, zoning, and decay. Ultimately, the greatest barrier to owning this history isn't the price tag, it's the sheer weight of the past. Would you ever take on this challenge? Let us know in the comments.